Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Chris.
3 weeks late. Hello, listeners.
It's already the end of January.
Oh,
it's rolling around to it now.
It's sometimes, Marie, you wish you could go back in time.
Well, I've been at the gym. I've been busy. I've been working out and lifting weights. So that's how time flies. No, I haven't. I've been watching TV.
I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to believe, Marie. I don't know what to believe.
Believe the laziest possible story, because that's the one that's going to be true.
Fascinating. It's good times. It's good times. Mm-hmm. Dear listeners, this episode, we are digging in, pun intended, to the story of Heinrich Schliemann.
Schliemann. Yes. The man who found Troy. Single-handedly, by the sweat of his brow, and from a storybook given to him by his father, found the great lost city of Troy. All by himself, right?
And then...
Totally with just...
Oh, no.
And then he gave it all back to the people.
Right, in rubble. All right, Jake, roll the tape.
So I hope my sarcasm was evident. In case anybody's like, dang, are they going to be they're going to be pro-Schliemann? I didn't expect this of them.
Oh my God, they're pro-Schliemann. No, I think we're pro-Schliemanists, pro or anti-Schliemann.
Oh my God.
Yeah, listeners, so last episode we talked about just kind of the general history of this site that we come to know as Hisarlik and Troy. And we kind of edged around this idea that there was this guy who finds it, although it wasn't ever really lost, but he finds it for the West and is like we like to do, and like I do.
Colonialist.
Well,
right?
I was going to say, yeah, like I do every time I discover a new town, I immediately act like I'm the first person to ever find it. And just completely ignore the people living there already. So
exactly.
Heinrich Schliemann,
or anyone else who's ever heard of it, like Portland, right? Oh my God, Portland's awesome.
I'm very new to Portland. So Heinrich Schliemann is an interesting figure because, first off, he's a lot of the big museums you've been to, and a lot of what you think of. And if besides like Jeb Card and like a couple of other people listening to this show who are actual archaeologists, unless you know how archaeology actually happens and kind of the history behind it and everything else, a lot of what you think of as archaeology is what this guy helped to kind of build and create.
Yes. And
it's intensely damaging. and not great. So, Marie, let's start off with the life of Heinrich Schliemann. So
there's two different stories for Schliemann, right? There's the story that is, again, with the capital S, which is what he has put forward as the narrative of who he was and what his values and morals were, and how this romanticized notion, again, that is very colonial and is a lot of myth, and that led him to this discovery. And then there's who he actually was based on facts and historical events, and like I said, like facts, right? So, and the two things, you try and, we were joking with Chris, we're trying to find somebody where those two things match up neatly with one another, and this is just not the case. So the story, capital S, with Schliemann was that at a very young age, when he was 7 years old, he was given a history book by his father. And in it were these pictures of Troy, and that he saw these pictures of Troy burning, and that was his genesis to want to fall in love with sort of the mythology that surrounds ancient Greece, and to find this lost city and rediscover it and its heritage and especially its treasure based on Homer. His father, again, story says, was a clergyman, and he, at a young age, installed a very strong work ethic in his son. And so Schleimann was an apprentice to a grocer. And in this grocer's shop, that's when he first learned and heard Greek, the spoken word, and that Homer was one of the stories that he heard at this very young age in the grocer's shop, which again, when I'm at Safeway, I know it's different. I know it's a different day and age, but you're not hearing a lot of the classicists in grocery stores. Is my thought. So he was several years in working as sort of a grocery clerk, and then he decided to immigrate. And so to do so, he became a cabin boy on a ship. He was in Germany, in Hamburg, and so he I want to say enlisted, but he signed on as a cabin boy for a ship bound from Hamburg to Venezuela. And again, the story, like, for me, that's sort of a big, that in itself should be the origin story. But this vessel wrecked off the Dutch coast, and he became, out of this wreck, he then became an office boy or a bookkeeper for a trading firm in Amsterdam.
Right.
And so he's got this auspicious, almost Hamilton-esque, right, upbringing of, like, he came from a humble background, and he had, he historically, I think it is true that he had a passion and an aptitude for languages, and that he could. Yeah,
it seems like he, like Marie's saying, there's the two stories of Schleimann. There's the heroic story that he himself tells. I guess there's really three, right? Like with any good public figure, there's always three stories, right? There's the heroic story that this person themselves says and is likely to become a biopic film, right? Then there is the real, the kind of gritty, less than positive view of the person that usually that film is rebooted 10 to 20 years after the initial biopic. Right? So think like, that's just kind of the way that happens, right?
Bill Cosby.
Right. Oh my God. And then, okay,
sorry.
And then there's the
2020
truth.
was looking so good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the truth that kind of sits in the middle, right?
There's the truth?
Well, so, okay. Yeah. There's never like actually truth, right? But it's like it's crazy to me that shipwreck actually happened.
Well, so it's like, again,
that's nuts.
You have sort of this huge gray area, right? Where, I mean, that in itself should be enough of a story, but that is him at 14. And again, it's almost like I said, it's like Hamilton-esque. It's like, okay, he came from poverty. He, bootstrapped himself up as a young German boy. He had this passion for languages. He had this photographic memory, and he had energy. He had determination. He had sort of this love of life, and he basically was self-taught on top of everything else. Right. So,
but then the truth. Yeah. But then the true story, or let's say the gritty reboot story. So okay. So he becomes a cabin boy. The shipwreck happens. He then starts working for this Dutch import-export company, which, I mean, I don't think there's anything in this story specifically about this, but like Dutch import-export companies around the 1850s, 1860s when he was working, maybe not some of the most great places to work, just from like a moral standpoint. But anyways,
their import and their exports were questionable.
Yeah, like ivory, or like not that long ago people, or like, kind of rough, right? But he eventually gets posted. He goes to Russia, right? This company sends him to Russia, and then he actually ends up going to America where his brother is living in California, right? Where he's living in somewhere in the West where there's a gold rush. The gold rush is occurring.
Right? So it's like, again, you have this massive backstory. He's in St. Petersburg, right? Which is in 1846 in St. Petersburg, which is a pretty interesting time to be there. He founded his own business. And again, he, invested his own money into the indigo trade at that time. He gets married, and he basically then, before he comes to America, he makes a fortune from this business, but then also it's during the time of the Crimean War. So, and he's known at that time as, air quoting, a military contractor. So we'll go into that, we'll go into that in the more truthful version of the story, but that should be enough right there. Again, he's in St. Petersburg. He's making quite a bit of money. He's married, but now, like Chris was saying, he all of a sudden is coming to the United States to become a U.S. citizen.
Right. And so
insane. Right.
And so when he gets here, right, when he comes here in the 1850s, late 1850s, and he becomes first off, we kind of glossed over this. He gets married in Russia in 1852 to Yekaterina Lyshin. Makes all of his money, comes to the United States in the late 1850s, and basically retires.
He's 36.
Yeah, he retires at 36 because somehow he retires at 36, right? He's made all this money. He's made all this crazy amounts of money and everything else. Shipping and sending things.
We're making him sound like a FedEx or something.
Well, kind of, right? Sort of. I mean, not really.
The import-export business.
Yeah, it's a little bit more questionable than that, but fine, right? Yeah. But so he, 36, he's made enough money that he decides, I'm going to focus all of my efforts on my lifelong dream, which has always been, and my passion, which has always been exploration and archaeology. And so at 36, he decides he's going to use all of his money to do that. Now that's kind of the good story up to this point in his life.
Yes.
The real story, or kind of, I guess, the gritty reboot story, the one where, Joaquin Phoenix will play Schleimann.
Oh, God, help me. Don't even get me started.
Turns out, so first off, he didn't come from the humble beginnings that he came from. It's not it's not humble upbringings because his father was this pious pastor and they lived in this, in this German town or whatever. So his father was a minister and was corrupt.
Yes, he embezzled church funds.
Right. So you were tithing to the church, you were giving money to the church, and he was using that money for personal means.
Yes. Yes. And this isn't necessarily his son's fault.
No, of course not. Of course not. Right. But it's through that money that Schleimann is educated as a child. So
he has to leave school. He doesn't get to university. He has to leave school because he does have to find employment because
his father's embezzlement is found out.
Yeah, and there's the stigma that naturally would go with that. That if you basically embezzled your neighbors, you're not going to want to stick around.
Yeah, but that's kind of like saying Kylie Jenner is the most wealthy, self-made. Yeah, kind of, I guess. And the name isn't great, and it maybe some people will turn their noses up at you or whatever. But a lot more people are just willing to take your money.
Jenner? Yeah.
Of archaeology, yes. I would say that is an accurate claim.
Oh, so that is the best pop culture reference so far. Yes.
He claims, so he'll claim, I brought myself up by these bootstraps or anything else, whatever. That's all hogwash, right? He does have to take a job, but again, it's not like he was working the fields, right? The guy was a kind of
he did menial tasks.
Right, he did menial tasks, but still menial tasks that somebody who is educated and is able to take at this time, right? These are like the 1830s, 1840s when he's doing these menial tasks, right? Yes. There are still people working the fields alongside donkeys, You know what I mean? Like this is like it's Abraham Lincoln 30 years before this grew up in a legitimate log cabin. So
this is I'll give you that. And this is like, before, industrial revolution is happening at this time. So like you still have child labor, you still have some real, real menial tasks.
Yeah.
But his is, I would say, he was a cabin boy. He did get shipwrecked, which is pretty crazy. But he's still coming out of that. He still was able to. It's
somewhere in the middle, right? And Kylie Jenner has had a really hard time with lip fillers recently, I've heard.
Do you know how much money, just really quickly as a quick segue, I know we're going to get back to talking about archaeology in Detroit, but how much money she's made? She's like a billionaire now.
Oh, Marie,
because of that.
Marie, there are guinea pigs I follow on Instagram that make more money than I do.
Well, no, I'm not in reference to us or anything in particular. I'm just sort of like more shocked at the idea. Like I was reading it online and I don't know, like you just, again, you expect a certain amount of gravitas, or maybe this is my naivete, right? You expect a certain amount of like, I don't know, somebody more befitting of like Angela Merkel or somebody who's, the head of the International Monetary Fund or something to be talking about like, how do you make money? How do you make investments? Whatever. And I'm like, how is Kylie Jenner a billionaire? But then as soon as the words come out of my mouth, I'm like, because I'm an idiot. That's why.
Yeah,
Why isn't she a millionaire? Where have I been? Okay. Anyway, sorry. That was my little dive.
No, yeah. The goal. I think the American the goal, Marie, since the time of Schleimann, has been to become rich enough that your kids can be dumb enough to still make $1 billion, but not have to work very hard.
Well, yes, to live off your name.
Hey, hot take. Anyways, all right. So there is definitely, there's gray here though, and I mean, again, there's gray with all these stories, right? I'm sure Kylie Jenner is a very good businesswoman, like whatever, it's fine. The challenge here is, again, he's telling this story. This guy loves the Homeric epics, and he's trying to turn his life into a Homeric epic. And some parts of it are legitimately crazy. The shipwreck is nuts. The fact that he even decided to go to Venezuela during this time period is like that's such a tremendous undertaking on again, it's a wooden ship. They don't, we did our history of surgery series. They're not that long since they knew how surgery was supposed to happen, or antiseptic, antiseptic technique, or any of that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
They're still wondering how they're getting scurvy and stuff. Like this is serious. This is a serious challenge that he decides to take up. So there are positive things about this person's life. So anyways, he makes all of his money. And again, he would say in his, I guess, positive, the people who would take a look positively at his history would say that he makes all of his money as a importer and exporter during the Crimean War. Right?
Yes. Yes. Which is basically a nice way of saying he's a war profiteer.
Right. And so for the Crimean War, for those that don't know, it's the war that's in War and Peace. Or no, not War and Peace.
Tolstoy.
Tolstoy. Yeah. The one in Tolstoy. So it's essentially a huge war between essentially the Russians, the Ottomans, the French, the English, and the Spanish. Right? So you have like the Russians on one side and everyone else on the other side.
Yeah, you got a lot of opportunities to make money. So he was selling munitions.
Right. And it's World War I is often considered kind of the first war where modern warfare happens, but in many ways it's the Crimean War. The Crimean War is the first time that we're using really naval weapons in the way that we would come to think of them. It's the first time that we're going to have a war where a railroad is really a possibility on a large scale, right? It's a bloody, terrible war, right? It goes on.
He made a lot of money.
Yeah, it goes on for 2 years. It's a rough time, right? And so this is also the war that Napoleon II is part of, right? So for those of you who know your French history very well, anyways, so It's a huge, it's something of a scandal, right? I mean, this guy becomes a war profiteer and then immediately flees. I mean, flees to America is kind of the wrong word, but
it's kind of a heavy connotation. He's going to handle his brother's estate. His brother died in California during the gold rush. So that is the reason that it is given for him. Again, he's under 40. He's married, to his first wife for now. And America looks good. I mean, he's got all this money. He's traveled. He's educated himself at the Sorbonne either before or after he was in America. So, I mean, he's got nothing but, he's nothing but liquid. And he comes to, and he shows up in California.
Right.
And I think my favorite personal story was that he did. So he claims that he was actually there for the 1851 fire that destroyed San Francisco, right? And that he describes this in detail, this disaster that he was an eyewitness to. And again, he was actually in Sacramento. And like all of his accounts of it came from newspapers, right? So it's like he had this ability to embellish himself into historical events and have some kind of credibility, which is amazing to me. It's like, again, like he didn't even, how could you sell yourself with that? And you're bearing witness to, this horrific period in American history, all of these lives, San Francisco on fire, and, but he was there for that. He also, during this time, knowing that the gold rush was happening and also knowing that, he had a good nose for making money, he opened a bank in Sacramento. He traded in gold and buying gold dust from miners and selling it back to interests in San Francisco. So there was about an 18-month period that he operated this bank. And during that time, he handled about $2 million, which is a fair amount, of gold dust. However, just like any kind of good, any kind of good businessman, and what we know of him is that he actually was accused of selling or sending short weights to the gold dust buyers.
Oh my God, no way!
What?
He was embezzling funds? No way! No way!
Basically was embezzling. I mean, short weight, again, like he was, skimming a little off the top is what it sounds like. But again, I mean, even in this day and age, 18 months, year and a half, $2 million. That's not bad.
No, that's crazy.
That's not bad.
No.
That's not, that's a lot of money going through with zero amount of, again, mid-1800s, zero amount of infrastructure to be able to everything's being hand calculated. It's, to me, that's insane that somebody could come in and, he's already accumulated all this wealth and it just flocks to him. That's the thing that I'm like, that's insane. But then again, so and I'm wrong, he wasn't married at this time. But so, as soon as people started to be like, they were like, hey, this doesn't add up. He's like, see ya, and hoofs it back to Russia.
Right. Well, so technically, I think at this point he got divorced, right, to Ekaterina Lyshyn, or he basically said to her, or does that happen later?
He goes back to Russia.
And he marries her in Russia. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Got it, okay.
But he's like, hey, but you know what? I am still a resident and a U.S. citizen. So I'm a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm just going back. I'm getting married. It's the daughter, again, a daughter of a Russian businessman. I'm going to get married. And so he basically goes back, and this is again, you see that he's the Crimean War. He profiteers off of the Civil War in the U.S. And is basically just making money hand over fist in some very nefarious ways.
Right. And so
that's basically the best way of putting it.
Speaking of making money hand over fist, Marie, we're going to have a little break for our sponsor.
Sweet.
I'm John Prideaux, The Economist's US editor, and I'm the host of a new podcast about the 2020 elections and the road to power in America. Together with two of my American colleagues and a whole cast of Economist correspondents around the world, we'll take you through the ideas and the social changes that are shaping politics in what promises to be an exceptional election year. We'll look at the long view and ask the big questions. What has the Trump administration actually achieved? What do centrist Democrats really believe in? And what kind of country is America going to be after November? We'll go beyond the headlines and the horse race to delve deeper into the contest for the White House and why it matters so much. That's Checks and Balance for the global view on democracy in America. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Acast, or your podcast app. Start listening today.
Marie, I was thinking, speaking of Greek words, I don't know when a good way to gingerly put this into the show would be. What's your favorite Greek food, Marie?
Oh my God, spanakopita. No, I just say that because it's good. It's good to say spanakopita.
That is good. I cannot say that word. So when I want it, what I tell my wife that I want is spanktopia. Which I know isn't how you say it, but it's how I've read it in my head since I was a child.
Spanktopia?
Spanktopia.
Here's the thing is your pronunciation and your ability to read humongous words is phenomenal. I mean, it is so good. I am always amazed at your ability to do this. And you're telling me that the one that's stumping you is leaving you with spanktopia?
Yeah. It's a word and it's food. Anyways, all right. So Schleimann goes back to Russia. He gets married to this businesswoman's daughter, or businessman's daughter, I should say. Then decides, okay, well, I'm gonna start doing all my diggings, right? So he wants to become an archaeologist, and he's wanted to be an archaeologist forever. And so he starts off kind of. He like builds an education for himself. The problem with that, like we see with a lot of these series, and I mean, Bigelow is a good example. A lot of the people in the Bigelow series were a good example of that. History of Surgery was a great example. Anytime you have somebody who kind of teaches themselves how to do something that for other people, there is a rigorous, standardized set of trainings that have to occur. It never goes great in the end. And part of the reason but to be fair to Schleimann, it's not like archaeology was really an ethical thing during this time anyways. It wasn't really, it wasn't even really a science. It wasn't really a discipline in the way that it is today.
Yeah.
So for instance, one of the things that becomes really common during this time period that we talked about in our interview with Jeb Card is smuggling artifacts.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And going to countries and kind of tricking the host country and saying, no, if we find anything, you guys get first crack at it. And then somehow the mummies leave Egypt. Right? They end up in the British Museum and they're like, where did we get those things? That's crazy. They're paying the people who are working these dig sites. They constantly have to pay them not to steal stuff because, they're paying
them nothing. Yes.
Right. But without this guy being there, those people would be selling antiquities to people like Schleimann, So It's an interesting kind of situation going on during this time period where archaeology at this time period is a lot more like grave robbing and looting.
Like really profitable grave robbing.
Yeah, which kind of sucks, right?
What it is. But that's kind of what it is. It's
right.
Like they don't really. I mean, I think that there is, and again, I think the lens of this romanticized idea and this very colonial idea of antiquity and sort of the ancient time has affected that, right? Like they're not wanting to see what they're actually excavating. They're digging for something,
right?
Which they could dig over or ignore actual artifacts.
Right. And that's,
I think a lot of it.
And that's really kind of the crux of the issue, right? Is like you said, and we're going to keep hitting this home, right? They're digging to find something, not digging to find everything, you know?
Right. And what they're digging to find is treasure.
Right. So it's like that scene in The Simpsons when Homer's like in the basement digging the hole, or I can't remember why this happens, but he's like digging or something is going on digging, and they go through the floor to like see what the ground looks like, and there's like a dinosaur, you know, you know, and it's like, but that's not what you're looking for. So you're just like, what the hell is this crap? And you throw it away. Right. A lot of that was going on. So, so he's a U.S. citizen in the 1850s. He goes back to Russia, retires at 36, and starts traveling the world and studying, quote unquote, studying history.
Yes.
Travels to Greece, to Italy, to Scandinavia, to Germany, to Syria. Then he goes to India, China, and Japan, and ends up writing books about China and Japan. And then, quote unquote, studies archaeology in Paris. But again, there wasn't.
Sorbonne.
Right, but archaeology wasn't a thing, you know.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying, like,
yes.
There's
saying,
nothing
quote,
that's like.
No, saying quote unquote studied.
Yeah.
It's not. This isn't like. You know. Oh, I studied kung fu. You know, and then you're. You know, it's like a third grader or whatever. This isn't like that, right? He did study it. There just wasn't a lot there at the time. Finally, in 1868, he decides to go to Greece.
Yes.
And so, Marie, pick it up from there.
Well, 1869.
Okay.
Just as a quick step note, I mean, he divorces the first wife.
Right,
so
but she can get bent though. Schleimann, he Schleimanned her, got her. All right, he divorces Ekaterina because she's like I don't want to go to, you know, I'm sure with a much thicker Russian accent. She's like, you know,
I do not want to go. What is this? We're going again. So yeah, that's a good. But so here's
don't you feel bad digging up the bones? And he's
the
like,
bones of your ancestors. What? No.
I sell them.
So she was Orthodox. She was Orthodox Russian, and it would have been impossible for divorce in conservative Russian culture, right? So, but he's not a Russian anymore. He's an American because he still has citizenship here. So he comes to the United States to Indiana, which at the time was a place known, and this is a quote from our source, known as a place of easy divorces.
Yeah,
Indiana.
Yeah, I'm sure they loved having that on the state coin.
Yes, I was gonna say that's on their bumper sticker. Indiana
divorces.
Place of easy divorces.
Right. So
basically he fakes 5 years of residency with false witnesses. So he bribes people to say that he's been living there for 5 years. He buys a home, spreads around some money, gets his lawyers, and then boom, divorced. And then he flips it around and gets a mail order bride.
Right. And the cool thing about divorce at this time period is that it took so long for information to travel. Well, you can imagine, right? She's in Russia. He's in Indiana. He decides, I'm getting divorced. She doesn't find out for like a year. You know, probably faster than that. But, you know.
If that. Right.
It's crazy, right? Like, you know, she's in Russia just like he's probably dead. And, you know, I hope she...
With the kids, right? She's raising the kids.
Right. I hope she moved on. So,
no.
Anyway, so yeah, so he decides to... He's now, kind of a free man, I guess you'd say. And
then he finds Sophie. Or I should say, he selects Sophie. He, is... he places an advertisement in an Athens newspaper for a bride, because he also, besides finding Troy and pillaging Troy, he also has the dream of finding a Greek wife, which I guess the two things go hand in hand. I didn't know that. that was sort of
strange.
I didn't get any of that in any of my classes. But that is how it's done, Chris. It's how it's done. You go after Troy, you have to get the Greek wife, and she can't be older than 20. She's over 20. No good.
He's a Homer-a-boo.
Back.
Marie, he's a Homer-a-boo. Do you know what a weeaboo is?
No,
he's a Troyaboo. So a weeaboo is someone who's like super obsessed with like Japan and like anime and all that kind of stuff or whatever.
Oh God.
He's like he's like the same level of like annoying obsessiveness with Troy. He's like, that's so annoying. It's so annoying. He's the worst kind of nerd. All right.
She has to be beautiful. So he
of course.
basically goes.
Of course.
Yeah,
have you seen the
chicks,
picture of Schleimann?
Yeah, exactly. What a catch. Yeah, he's a Greek god right there.
No fat chicks in Greek.
No fat chicks in Greek. Yeah, how do you say that in Greek? What's the Homeric phrase for, rosy-fingered Dawn, brave Achilles, loyal lieutenant, and no fat chicks.
Right.
So he stipulates, in all of his advertising and to the people that he's, soliciting to help find the wife, she should be beautiful, well-educated, and enthusiastic about Homer.
Right.
She's got must love dogs. No, must be enthusiastic about Homer. So basically he then looks at all these pictures, again, this is exactly how, his, like, I can't even believe that this is, of course it happened. And he finds Sophia, right? Which is a great Greek name. Sophia, I'm not even going to try and pronounce her last name, but she's 17 years old, 30 years younger than Schleimann at this point, educated. She is reported to have been eager to marry into great riches, which, okay. And she can recite Homer and has an enthusiasm for archaeology. So it's just, it does sound like and again, in some of the sources we've read, that Sophia was did have some more of a true interest than his first wife in archaeology and in ancient Greece. I can't imagine it was, that she was too enthusiastic, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. The thing is that I'm sure the first wife thought she was just marrying someone super into guns, and then he starts bringing up, his day equivalent of like anime and manga and stuff. And she's like, I'm out. This is terrible. This is the worst. It's like with my wife. She married me. She did not think that podcasting would become a thing. Now she can't shut me up about it. It's great. So by the way that you say no fat chicks in Greek is ochi kontres kopeles.
Oh God! Please don't tweet at us. We're joking. We're not trying to fat shame anyone.
We're joking. Schleimann is a terrible, disgusting nerd. He's like the worst person. He's not even a disgusting
nerd. Like, I would much sooner have him be a nerd. He seems like a real douche. He seems like somebody who's bought his way into some sort of authenticity, which is even the worst thing. Like that he actually believes that he is owed this in some ways, that he is going to do this and that this is his calling, and he's in this Homeric vision of himself, is such denial. It's such like self, like he's so delusional that it's just sort of it's funny in some ways, but then he actually does the thing that kind of like is even more insane is that he actually does find Troy. He actually does. Well, he doesn't find it. He rediscovers it.
Right. Well,
the place that everybody said it was, but he gets credit for it, and he did discover some of it.
Right. So what?
I'm begrudgingly talking about this now. Yeah.
Like, in many ways, like
This is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't have nice things.
Well,
this is where we start off with a really great story, and then these people just turn out to be douches.
Well, so in a very similar way to, like, you know, if you read any of, like, the original history of, like, punk rock, right? You know, God. none of the like none of them dressed like that until they met like Malcolm McLaren, right?
Right. Well, Malcolm. Oh yes. Yeah. I mean, that was a totally
like,
manufactured thing. That was a boy band.
Right.
Sorry,
exactly.
It was.
Right.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's the same kind of thing here, where he thinks he's got the looks, he's got the theory, everything else, all this other stuff. He really wants to get in there, but just like with Malcolm McLaren, all of that is just talk. You know, it's all just talk.
Yep.
Until you meet someone who can really do it. Right.
Yes.
And so, just like McLaren, had the New York Dolls and the Sex Pistols, Schleimann will have his Calvert. So Schleimann will now. He's in Greece.
Dorpfeld and Calvin.
Right. He's got his Greek, the weird Greek wife thing going on. Right. He's in Greece. He's gotten all the kind of groundwork going, and he starts asking around and finding people who have made inroads in the kind of things that he's interested in. Right. Mm-hmm. And so he's talking, he's trying to find out who's been looking for Troy, investigating ancient Greek history and the Homeric tradition and everything else. And he comes upon these two people. And that is kind of the start of I hesitate to say good relationship or good working relationship. But I will say one that ends up being productive and also pretty destructive.
Yes.
And that, dear listeners, is where we're going to pick up next episode.
Yes. Until then, don't tweet at us. for defaming punk rock or
Kylie Jenner
or fat shaming or Kylie Jenner. Oh, dude, this is not a good start for 2020. We got to bounce back. We got to get some. It's been rough, Marie. We gotta get some stuff we're positive about in here.
I know. I'm telling you, we got to be much more positive, Marie.
Woo! No, we don't. That's
all right.
Oh, hell no.
Thank you again, dear listeners. We'll be back next week with the conclusion of our series on Troy. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Yes, we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.